Hello. Today's lecture is about human environment interactions, and when we talk about, environmental issues, it's a is a way that you could, separate environmental issues from human and or to separate human from the nature. So because we are observers, but it's not true because in reality, humans are embedded in the nature and they are intertwined, integrated systems. So that shaping and being shaped by, it constantly. So our goal here is to understand the relationship between human and environment, how environment could be shaped by human and how human can shape environment, all of those things, and some examples and some foundational, approaches. So, we, before diving into some quick announcements, the first one is reading reflection, as always, will be on next Monday, and we will have project proposal due date on next Monday as well. So make sure that you submit your proposals. I will be reviewing and getting some, feedback to you, after reading your proposals. So don't worry, after, fixing the topic, you will be able to continue working on your proposal by the end of semester. So uh, the next one is 2021 ArcGIS Story Map Competition. It's a great opportunity for all of you to, send, for example, a story map, regardless of your majors, to Esri, which is the greatest company in the world, which produces different GIS sources and software, and the story maps, which is free. You can, log in a story map by your Medas, account information, and I will post a video or tutorial about story maps as soon as possible, so you will be able to use it also for your final projects to show your, SES system by using story maps, right? You can check, for example, the deadline is the 1st of December, so we will have more time to work on it. Um, Actually, here is what we'll cover today. So we'll start with some foundational models and typologies to frame how geographies and environmental scientists think about environment interaction, and then we'll explore how actually humans act as a planetary, force, and how, for example, different modern approaches like ecosystem services and sustainability framework can help us, you know, better understand the human environment mechanisms and interactions in different contexts. So we can get a start with models of human environment interaction. Historically, this table shows that historically scholars, have offered different ways of thinking about, human and environment interactions and relations. So we can categorize these different framings into four. The first one, environmental determinism, which argued that environment determines human behavior. For example, people in cold climates are industrious, but in tropical, uh, you know, climate could be more, lazy. So this was popular in early 20th century or 19th century, but is now discredited because it didn't, account for other social and political differences, which is not, necessarily related to climate or environment. So you can see some sort of, framings and thinking in the works of Frederick Ratzel. And after that, we saw a new approach named possibilism, which saying that environment sets limits and humans, can adapt creatively with those limits, which we see in early to mid, 20th century, this kind of trend. And then we saw cultural ecology, which examined how cultures evolve to their environments, looking at local adaptation in, technologies and social practices. And we see in Julian Stewart works this kind of, you know, thinking. And then we saw political ecology, which is actually the dominant philosophical, model for human environment interaction. And we currently, you know, uh, use this framework as a main frame of mind to see, for example, this kind of interaction. And it says that environmental outcomes are shaped by political and economic systems, not just natural conditions, which, you know, started from late 20th century to present. And so um, this table shows a clear progression from nature controlling human to human adopting nature, and finally, human shaping nature under social forces. But the question is raises here is that, and how strongly human impact the environment. We see three different uh, interaction typologies. The first one is dependency. In this case, actually human is dependent, totally dependent. We see, this kind of interaction in early societies who, you know, would use foraging, hunting, and all of those things depending on wild plants and animals. And then we move to adaptation era in which human, try to adjust their behaviors, their activities, based on economic and environmental conditions and situations and limits. For example, building stilt houses in flood-prone areas, or traced, for example, farming in mountainous regions. And after that, we saw modification, which human actively reshape the environment. And for example, by clearing, cutting forests, by building dams, by, urbanizing, all of those examples actually show the modification type of interaction. So, yeah. And actually, humans have become a planetary force. Our actions are altering the atmosphere, ocean, biodiversity, and even geological processes. And for example, industrial farming or agriculture, changes nutrient cycle, or urbanization changes hydrology, and fossil fuel, burning could result in climate change. And that's the starting point what for many of today's, environmental crises. And actually the Anthropocene area that we have been, you know, since 1950, by a, you know, term which was basically coined by Paul Crutzen, a novelist in atmospheric chemistry in 2000. He, defined Anthropocene as a new geological, you know, age which began since 1950 as a new geological epoch characterized by the profound and lasting impact of human activities. So it shows that in this area, human is the dominant driving force of climate systems and natural processes and human environment interaction. So yeah, and we call, for example, this kind of impacts as anthropogenic, impacts. Uh, but one of the greatest frameworks to uh, structuralize, for example, this kind of interaction is socio-ecological systems, or briefly SES, which is about the interaction between human and ecosystems. In these ecosystems, we see that human are embedded in nature, so they are intertwined, they are integrated, and they are interacting, constantly to shape, for example, new behaviors and regimes. So this is a linked and interconnected, systems, and we use feedback loops to, explain, for example, how much change could happen if, for example, a part of the system changes. So we see that is a cyclical, pattern. We see this is not linear, this is cyclical. We see that, for example, a change or action or any innovations in environments like fishing, like logging, could result in, ecosystem change, and ecosystem change, you know, leads to ecosystem services changes in the food production, in water, quality, or all of those things, which consequently, results in human systems challenges like health challenges or well-being, issues. Uh, and to better understand and examine these complex adaptive systems, which sometimes is called coupled human environment, systems, we needed an interdisciplinary thinking and framing, which requires a collaboration between different, scientists and experts from different fields, including but not limited to ecology, geology, geography, economy, architects, urban planners, or climatologists, and all of those disciplines, could collaborate and contribute in this way of thinking. And it's not a disciplinary oriented, process. It's a real interdisciplinary thinking that we needed. Otherwise, we may focus on one aspect and ignore other, inner connected aspects. Here you can see a, good example of socio-ecological systems which we reside in, which is named Chesapeake Bay watershed. And so it is the large estuary in the US, and supports diverse ecosystems and economies. And but at the same time, we see a population growth and agriculture activities and resource, consumption and, water and air pollution have degraded, water quality and land, atmosphere, interactions. And actually, local decisions about farming in different parts of housing or waste disposal cascade through a regional ecosystem, system, the original ecosystem um, mechanism and affect fisheries, economies, recreation, and climate resilience ultimately. So this is a great example to see how, for example, these are interconnected, how these different components may relate to each other and impact them. So, but when we talk about, SES or socio-ecological systems, one topic or concept which is central is resilience. Resilience is defined with the capacity to absorb shocks without, collapsing. Systems can adapt to stress, but only, to a point, as you can see in the picture, in the chart. In the middle, we see tipping points, which is irreversible, points. And before that, we see that, for example, the resilience of the system and to what extent, for example, it could absorb changes, shocks. These shocks could be, for example, a natural hazard, flooding, or environmental risk, or what pollution, or land use change, or whatever activities that human cause the environment to be harmed. And it if pressures, push them past a tipping point, and this point, the system could, fall in the new regime, which is a new equilibrium, and which is a new system. Actually, we have regime B, regime A, and this process is named regime shift. And in a new system, we see, a new and different set of, characteristics, which totally, changes from the previous one. For example, you can see in this picture, uh, uh, a forest can become savanna after repeated, drought and fires. So this vividly shows, for example, how a system can, pass the tipping point and becomes a new regime. Which, is shown in the right picture. So avoiding this tipping point is critical for sustainability. Here, let's focus on another global, framework, which is really useful to better understand different services that this kind of systems or socio-ecological systems can provide us. So, ecosystem provides services that sustain life and economies. And we have four different categories for ecosystem services, which was introduced by the European Commission and the Millennium Assessment in 2005, which includes provisioning services, which products obtained from ecosystem like energy, food, fiber, seafood, biomedical, all of those, services. Another great service that we take from the nature is regulating services, which benefits obtained from the regulation of ecosystem processes like flood regulation, for example, or air pollution regulation, or climate regulation, or erosion control, pest control, or something like that. And also we have socio-ecological, I'm sorry, cultural services, which is about, for example, the emotional, educational, recreational, all of spiritual, all of the, social benefits that we gain from the touching with nature and also the natural environment. And finally, we have supporting services, which are necessary for the production of all above, tree provisioning, regulating, and cultural services. And they can include, for example, soil formation, nutrients cycling, uh, primary productivity, biological diversity maintenance, all of those services, which we call them as supporting services, which support the, main services that we take from the environment. So this is very helpful, and you can, create this chart for your projects, for your research ideas, for your, case studies, and put different services into different four categories to better understand, for example, or categorize these different services that we want to analyze in our case studies. Another global, framework which uh, encourage us to reach sustainability and create sustainable environments is sustainability framework, which includes 17 different goals, which we call them sustainable development goals or SDG, and starting from no poverty and to partnerships for the goals and so many different, goals that you can see here. Each of them has its own, document, summary reports, and objectives, instructions, different solutions and strategies to be applied in different contexts and countries, regardless of the region, regardless of the continent. It's global. So, and all of these uh, goals support three different components of sustainability or three pillars of sustainability, which are called environmental protection, social equity, and economic viability, which are necessary to create a sustainable environment. All right. Uh, Urbanization is a powerful example of human environment interaction, and um, as the studies show, urban areas cover only 3% of the Earth's land, while, for example, it houses more than half of the population of the world, which is crazy because, for example, we see that a lot of, densely environment and also density are located in such a small land of the earth on the earth, and uh, so we see the population density in these areas, which could, constantly face with different impacts of climate change and habitat loss and increased resource consumptions in these areas. And in some areas, we face, urban poverty, which is a result of this um, resource scarcity and also inequities in distributions of resources, all of those, matters. Or, for example, in this figure, you see, for example, Baltimore region land use change, which is due owing to the fact of the urbanizations could force, more impervious surfaces, creation and also expanding the city limits and shaping or reshaping actually the suburban areas that you can see in the picture. Another effect or impact of this kind of human environment interaction is urban heat island, which are areas that are significantly warmer than the surrounding rural areas due to, for example, air and truck exhausting, car exhausting in cities, manufacturing, food production. All of those activities actually produce more energy and heat, which raises the temperature of inner cities, compared to rural areas or suburban areas, as you can see in the chart. We see warmer areas in central business district or CBD or city core or downtown areas, which also has lower green spaces compared to rural suburban areas. And so this could lead into, for example, higher temperature, above the inner cities. Uh, all right. And finally, we have another, potential uh, human environment interaction in our cities, which is called brownfield redevelopments. Brownfields are previously used properties wherein pollutions, hazardous, substances and contaminants are present. For example, in the US, we have more than 450,000, brownfields in the US, and they are great resources for remediation and turning into green developments, housing, constructions, or even, for example, parking lots in our cities. And sometimes we actually have limited space for constructing these spaces, but brownfields are great resources to uh, provide, for example, this kind of services in our cities. But otherwise, if we, ignore the current status of uh, brownfields, they could, uh, accelerate some health and safety issues for the residents. So this is another good topic, uh, explaining this kind of human environment interaction and potentials. So yeah, that's it. Thank you so much. If anyone has any questions, please reach out to me. We can also set in virtual or in-person appointments for your projects, for your topics, for any, consultant that you need. Have a good one.